Hello and welcome back to FatbossTV. Today we're back from more raid testing and we're looking at Nythendra from the Emerald Nightmare.
Yes, and this appears that it's going to be the first boss in the Emerald Nightmare because it's listed first within the dungeon journal at least. However, this instance potentially might have various different routes you can take at the very start, so we can't really say for sure. Either way, she's an early boss and she is a corrupt member of the Green Dragonflight, and when the Emerald Dream got corrupted, so did she, and now she's made of insects and wants to destroy you.
Now, as we are fighting a dragon, we do have to deal with some good old-fashioned dragon mechanics. This means if you're stood directly behind her, she will do a tail lash, which means you get knocked back as well as taking some damage, and she also has a breath. But this breath is different from most other dragon breaths. Instead of just hitting your tanks and making your tank use some sort of magic damage reduction, it will instead target the location of any DPS or healer. Once she has picked that location, she'll then charge it up and breathe across the room, dealing large taking damage to anyone caught within it. And this breath also leaves behind large piles of green patches, and these patches slow and deal ticking damage if you stand inside them.
Now, as this mechanic is directed at a random non-tank player, we made sure that we were always stacked on top of each other in melee range. This made it so that when the breath came in, we could always move together in one direction without anyone taking any of the damage. If anyone did get caught by the breath, it did seem that extra green patches would spawn at that location, meaning that if you are getting hit in melee, that would make the encounter area a little bit more dodgy because you're going to get a bunch of these green patches in melee, and that's not very nice, so we made sure that we did move quickly.
It's also important in this fight to keep the encounter area as clear as possible because you do get a mini phase later on in the fight, so it does seem to be a really good idea to keep the patches as close together as possible, and we did this by just making sure that the raid always moved as a single unit and moved as close to the previous patches of goo as possible, so when the breath does come in, the new patches that are created are very close to the old ones, and in some cases they do even appear to overlap.
However, stacking up all the time might not be the best idea because of an ability called Rot. This is a 9-second debuff that is applied to multiple targets, and this will deal damage to anyone within 10 yards every 3 seconds. Once the debuff expires, you will spawn some of the same green goo patches that the breath does underneath yourself. So the idea is that once you get this debuff, you want to run out of the group as soon as possible in order to avoid unnecessary damage. Rot usually happens in the downtime between breaths, however at certain points it overlaps. When this occasion arises, the debuffs time out at the exact same time that the breath begins its channel. Because of this, it's best to place the rots directly behind the raid. That way, you're still within the line of the group, making it so the breath will still face the same direction, but this may mean that rot targets will have to run significantly further than the raid when the breath comes in. But this overall does prevent from them either being closed in, or even potentially blocking the entire raid from moving by putting the breath in front of where they were going to move into.
Now for the tanks to deal with is a debuff called Volatile Rot. This ability works in a very similar way to how Iron Reaver's artillery works. It's an 8-second debuff that when it expires, it deals damage to the entire raid, but the further the tank away is from the group, the less damage everyone takes. On top of that, the debuff when it does expire will also spawn even more of these patches. So the way that we dealt with this was just had our tank move as far away from the raid as possible, but ideally into an area that's already covered in these green patches. This would mean that, of course, the raid takes less damage, and ultimately the patches are more bunched up. And of course, when this does happen, we also made our tank swap, because you don't want the boss to run off and tail swipe the entire group.
Now you may have noticed that everyone is taking ticking damage. This is from a debuff called Infested. The debuff is applied to you when you are hit by any of the boss's abilities minus Tail Slash. So the dot doesn't really hurt that much, but it does stack up each time a player is hit by Rot, or the raid-wide damage from Infested Rot, or for being hit by her breath, or standing in any of the green puddles. Most importantly, this debuff has no duration. So if you fuck up early in the encounter and you get really high stacks, your healers are going to be really angry with you and they're going to start running out of mana very fast just trying to keep you up from this dot. Therefore, most of the fight is just trying to take as little infested stacks as possible. So that's why it's important that you deal with the breath and the rot the best you can.
And ultimately, the reason why this debuff is so important is because on Mythic, this isn't Mythic testing right here, this is only Heroic, but on Mythic, if you get 10 stacks, you're mind controlled.
Yeah.
And we don't know if you can break that mind control or anything like that. There's no information on that, so we just assume it's bad.
Yeah, so if you can just learn in Heroic how to get as few stacks as possible, it will help you out in Mythic, so even if you're not going to go there, you can at least try and play as good as you can.
Now, once the boss has run out of energy, she decides to go to sleep for 20 seconds, and it's at this point she'll start soaking up all the green patches around the room, and after 20 seconds, they're all completely gone. And as there are so many patches and they're all traveling towards the boss, it's very likely that you're going to be caught by one, and getting caught by one is bad. You're going to be taking ticking damage and you're going to get more stacks. And this is why it's so important that you keep large areas of the room completely clear of these patches, because you can just move into those areas and ignore that mechanic. Also during this phase, various bugs will appear all over the room. And what happens is that periodically some of these bugs will just grow and start dealing pulsing AoE damage to any players within 10 yards of them. You cannot physically kill these bugs, so instead you're forced to simply move away from them. And the damage they deal is pretty substantial, and it does ramp up if you're hit multiple times. And that's it for this particular point of the fight. So during this phase, although you no longer have to deal with boss abilities, you are instead playing a game of dancing around bugs and goo. And of course, you now realize why it's so important to have lots of clear areas of the room, because the more room you have, the easier it is. And after those 20 seconds, the boss becomes active and the fight just repeats and things continue as normal. However, the previous infested stacks you had have now been completely removed, so you now can continue the fight as if it was the pool.
Now it also appears that the more time she goes into these sleeping phases, the next time she's back, Rot will apply to more and more targets each time. So for us, at the beginning of the fight, it went on 2 targets, she'd go to sleep, and then when she came back, it also went on 2 targets. But once she's finished her second sleep, it then went on 3. Then she slept again, it went on 3. So I assume it would go 2-2, 3-3, 4-4. And the thing is, Rot is probably one of the harder mechanics to deal with in this fight.
Yeah, I mean, that's where most of the stacks are coming from, especially on single targets, because while you have Rot, you're consistently getting stacks.
Yeah, exactly. So if you have loads of the raid starting to take these infested stacks, it's going to get very, very, very messy. So it does kind of just make the fight more difficult as you go along.
And that's the encounter. There's not really much else to it. So it is a simple fight, but it does have dire consequences if you mess up. And the great thing about it, it's really clear, especially to the healers, if someone has messed up, because you can just simply look at how many infested stacks they have.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing is as well, if someone places a breath in the wrong direction, that's pretty fucking clear as well, because now like the entire fucking room is covered in goo, and the Heart of the Swarm phase is going to be really, really difficult. So I imagine if you're going to bug this, you're going to have some very good strats in place, because otherwise you're going to be pretty angry. But yeah, it's nice to fight a dragon again.
I agree, yeah.
And we didn't have any dragon fights in Draenor because of lore, I think. There was some lore reason behind it. But it's nice to fight a dragon again. They put a little bit of a spin on the old dragon mechanics. Of course, they got the tail lash still, which is usual.
And the new model.
Yeah, and the new model is very, very pretty, made of insects and swarms and stuff. It looks very, very cool. But I like how the breath, instead of it becoming like pretty much just a tank-only mechanic that healers need to maybe precast for, it's kind of something that the majority of the raid needs to be involved with. And considering the tanks haven't got that anymore, they just kind of gave them the artillery from Iron Reaver, which might be a little bit lazy, but, you know, they still gave them something to deal with. Yeah, exactly.
It's better than taunting on 3.
Exactly.
But apart from that, the boss, I mean, it maybe has a little bit too much health, but of course it's alpha.
They normally in testing, they have bosses with really high health because they don't want you to kill it. They just want you to see how long you can go on it. So yeah, I think we had like 10 minutes on a fight and we got it to like 50 or 40%. I think it'll be more like a 6-minute fight or something.
Probably, yeah. Also, the bugs are kind of hard to see in the Heart of the Swarm phase, I'd say.
Yes.
Because you have different types. You have like a green one or a greedy white one. That's really easy to see when it grows. But there's also red and black ones. And the floor is red and black, more or less.
Yeah, and it's like preferable if you can move from the bugs as they're growing. And as you're kind of like looking on the floor trying to see which of the 30 bugs near you are growing, it can be really easy to miss the red ones that are swelling up. So maybe if they change them to like a different color from red, that'll be really nice. It will help you see what's going on. The one last thing that could be a problem on this fight is maybe how the Rot can go on melee DPS. It can make it maybe a little bit melee unfriendly because, of course, if you're going to be using Rot in the way that as soon as you get the debuff, you run away, that's a long old downtime.
I mean, that's at least 9 seconds of downtime.
Exactly, and that's assuming that you can get back to the boss immediately. So maybe you could like devise a strat where you go on the opposite side of the boss, but then you're going to have like goo spawning underneath the boss, which won't be particularly nice.
I mean, you'd have Rot like right in the middle of the room.
Yeah, so I'm not entirely sure. You could probably make a strat where it's nicer to melee, but like you could just go with full range and do the same thing. So this fight isn't particularly melee friendly, but it's not the end of the world. It's only like 1 debuff and it should be fine. But yeah, awesome encounter. I really did enjoy my time on this fight. It was very clean. Everything seemed to work pretty well. Considering it's alpha, it's very not buggy.
And ultimately, it was more fun than Ursoc.
I'd say so,
Way more fun than
Ursoc.
Ursoc.
Because, you know, everyone wasn't getting 1 hit. That was great. That was really, really good.
Well, thank you very much for watching, guys. If you enjoyed this little preview, then do drop us down a like. There's more to come, so make sure you subscribe. And we'll see you in the next video.
Thanks for watching.